They laughed because they thought she was invisible, but by the end of dinner, every person in that room would remember the exact moment Vincent Callahan stood up. Angela Brooks felt the first laugh before she understood the insult, the way a storm is felt in the bones before thunder reaches the glass. She stood behind 6-year-old Ethan Callahan's chair with a linen napkin folded over one arm, her black dress plain beside the ivory walls, the gold-rimmed plates, the crystal glasses glowing under the chandelier like frozen drops of light. The dining room of the Callahan estate had been built to intimidate without raising its voice. 28 feet long, polished walnut floors, a fireplace tall enough for a grown man to stand inside, and windows that looked down over the black water of Lake Michigan. Around the table sat people who smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and the easy confidence of never being asked to prove they belonged anywhere. Angela did not belong to their world, and they wanted her to know it. She had only stepped closer because Ethan's hand had begun to shake around his fork, the little boy's breathing turning shallow the way it did whenever too many voices stacked on top of one another. Without interrupting the conversation, she leaned down and softly cut his roasted chicken into smaller pieces, steadying the plate with one hand while whispering, "Easy, sweetheart. One bite at a time." That was when Carter Whitmore, a banker with silver hair and a smile too white to be kind, looked over the rim of his wine glass and said, "Careful, Vincent. Your nanny looks more like she belongs in the kitchen than near your heir." The laughter moved down the table in a smooth, polished wave. A woman touched her pearls as if the comment had been clever. Another guest hid her smile behind a napkin but did not hide it well enough. Angela's fingers paused on the handle of the small knife. She did not look up. She had learned long ago that some people mistook silence for permission, and others mistook dignity for weakness. Ethan heard it, though. His small shoulders tightened. His brown eyes lifted toward her face, searching for injury, searching for proof that the adults had not just turned cruelty into dinner entertainment. Angela gave him a calm smile, the kind that cost her something. "You're all right," she whispered. "Keep your eyes on me." At the head of the table, Vincent Callahan remained still. He was dressed in a black suit, white shirt open at the collar, his pale face unreadable beneath the warm light. Men twice Carter Whitmore's age had gone silent under that gaze, but tonight Vincent had said almost nothing. He watched the room as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. The guests took his silence as approval. That was their first mistake. Madison Whitmore leaned forward, her diamond bracelet flashing against her wrist. "I'm only surprised she's allowed in the formal dining room," she said lightly, as though cruelty became manners if spoken softly. "Most families keep the help where guests don't have to step around them." Angela felt heat rise behind her eyes, but her hands stayed gentle as she adjusted Ethan's glass of water. The boy's breathing hitched once, then twice. She could feel the edge of panic coming for him, quiet and fast. All around her, the silverware kept shining, the candles kept burning, and the people at the table kept smiling like nothing human had been wounded. Vincent's knife stopped moving against his plate. The sound was almost nothing, a soft click beneath the chandelier. But Angela heard it. So did every guard standing near the walls. Still, no one spoke. Not yet. And that silence, thin as a blade and heavy as judgment, settled over the table while the guests laughed one more time, not knowing they had just mocked the only person in that mansion who had ever put Ethan Callahan's life before her own. Angela Brooks had not always worked in houses where the floors shined brighter than most people's futures. 3 years earlier, she had worn blue scrubs in a pediatric recovery unit on the South Side, working 12-hour shifts under fluorescent lights, measuring medicine, calming frightened children, and teaching exhausted parents how to listen for the small warnings that came before a crisis. She had been good at it, not because she was loud or impressive, but because she noticed what others missed. A child who stopped tapping his foot, a baby whose cry changed by half a note, a little girl who said she was fine while gripping the bedsheet too tightly. Angela trusted details. Details had saved lives. Then her mother's kidneys failed, and the bills arrived like weather that never cleared. Angela left the hospital, took private care jobs, cleaned houses on weekends, and slept in pieces whenever life allowed it. By the time she walked through the iron gates of the Callahan estate, she had $73 in her checking account, a mother who needed treatment twice a week, and no room left for pride that did not help someone survive. Vincent Callahan's staff had warned her on the first morning. Do not ask questions. Do not wander. Do not speak unless spoken to. Most of all, do not get attached to the boy. Angela had nodded because she needed the paycheck, but rules written by frightened adults had never mattered much to a child in pain. Ethan Callahan had been smaller than she expected, all sharp elbows, serious eyes, and silence too heavy for 6 years old. He watched people the way other children watch thunderstorms, waiting to see where the damage would land. The first 3 nannies had lasted less than a month. One said he was difficult. Another said he was spoiled. The third left in tears after Ethan hid under a library table for 2 hours and refused to come out. Angela did not call him difficult. She sat 6 feet away on the floor, placed a small bowl of crackers between them, and began humming an old hymn her grandmother used to sing while folding laundry in Georgia heat. After 20 minutes, Ethan reached for a cracker. After 40, he asked her name. After 1 week, he let her hold his hand. By the end of the first month, the entire household knew that if Ethan woke from a nightmare, he called for Miss Angela before he called for his father. Vincent noticed everything, though he rarely admitted what he saw. He noticed that Angela never raised her voice. He noticed that Ethan ate more when she was near. He noticed that she carried a small notebook in her pocket filled with times, foods, moods, and tiny patterns no doctor had bothered to write down. But Vincent also belonged to a world where trust was a locked door, and gratitude was a weakness men used against you. So he kept his distance. He paid her salary on time. He approved her schedule. He let her remain in the house because his son needed her, not because he understood her. Angela accepted that distance. She had never come there looking for warmth. She came to protect a child, to send money home, and to leave each night with her dignity still folded carefully inside her chest. But on that evening, standing under the chandelier while wealthy strangers laughed at her like she was part of the furniture, Angela felt Ethan's hand slide into hers beneath the edge of the tablecloth, small, frightened, and trusting. That touch reminded her why she stayed. Not for the mansion, not for Vincent Callahan's money, not for the polished people who could not recognize goodness unless it wore diamonds. She stayed because one little boy in that cold house had learned to breathe easier when she was near, and Angela Brooks had never abandoned a child just because adults made the room cruel. By the time the second course arrived, the dining room had become exactly what Vincent Callahan had designed it to be, a theater of wealth where every object knew its price, and every guest believed they did too. The long walnut table stretched beneath the chandelier with 12 place settings arranged like a ceremony, silver forks aligned by invisible measurement, white roses floating in shallow glass bowls, candles reflecting against crystal until the whole room seemed to shimmer. Outside, Lake Michigan was dark beyond the windows, the kind of dark that made the mansion feel even brighter, even farther from the ordinary streets where people counted grocery dollars and watched gas prices by the cent. Angela stood behind Ethan's chair with her hands folded at her waist, close enough for him to reach her, far enough to remind everyone she was not seated among them. That distance was not an accident. It had been measured by custom, by money, by generations of people who believed kindness had a uniform and power had a chair. Vincent sat at the head of the table, quiet as stone. While Carter Whitmore spoke about a downtown development deal, Madison Whitmore laughed too loudly at things that were not funny, and a retired judge named Harold Benson kept glancing at Angela as if her presence had interrupted the flavor of his meal. The guests had come for influence, not dinner. They wanted Vincent's approval, his partnerships, his protection, his name beside theirs in rooms where doors opened only for people with the right kind of fear behind them. But Ethan did not care about any of that. He only cared that the room was too loud, the candles smelled too sweet, and Madison's perfume made his throat tighten whenever she leaned across the table. Angela noticed the first sign when his left hand disappeared under the tablecloth. The second sign came when he stopped chewing. The third was the tiny crease between his eyebrows that no one else ever saw. She bent slightly, keeping her voice low. "Take a sip of water, sweetheart. Slow breath in, slow breath out." Ethan obeyed, but Harold Benson snorted into his glass. "Well, look at that," he said. "She has him trained like a little prince." A few guests chuckled. Angela kept her eyes on Ethan. Madison tilted her head, studying Angela's plain black dress and simple shoes as if kindness itself had offended her. "Where did Vincent find you again?" she asked. "An agency, ma'am," Angela answered softly. How charming, Madison said. I suppose they teach you girls how to stand quietly in corners. The word girls landed with a sweetness that made it uglier. Angela felt it, but she did not flinch. She had heard worse in hospital hallways from parents too scared to be polite, in grocery stores from strangers who mistook exhaustion for weakness, in offices where women with polished nails spoke about her as if she were not standing 3 feet away. She had survived every version of being underestimated. What hurt was Ethan hearing it. Carter reached for his wine and smiled toward Vincent. You always did have unusual taste in household staff. Vincent did not smile back. His eyes moved once to Angela, then to Ethan's hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth. The conversation should have died there. Anyone wiser would have felt the air change. But wealth had made these people careless, and carelessness dressed in silk still looked like ignorance. Madison lifted her fork, then let it slip from her fingers. It struck the floor with a bright, delicate sound. She leaned back in her chair and looked directly at Angela. Would you mind? She asked, her voice soft enough to pretend innocence. The table went still for half a breath. Then Carter laughed under his breath. Angela looked at the fork on the floor, then at Ethan, whose face had gone pale with shame that did not belong to him. Slowly, she stepped around his chair, bent down, and picked up the fork with steady fingers. She did not do it for Madison. She did it so Ethan would not learn that dignity had to shout in order to exist. Angela placed the fork on a small service plate, instead of returning it to Madison's hand. I will ask the kitchen for a clean one, she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Madison's smile thinned. How professional. Angela turned to go, but Ethan caught her wrist. His small voice trembled through the bright room. Miss Angela did not do anything wrong. No one laughed then. Not because they were sorry, but because a child had said the truth too plainly. Vincent's gaze dropped to his son's hand wrapped around Angela's wrist. Something in his expression changed so subtly that only the guards along the wall noticed. The room kept its candles, its crystal, its perfect flowers. But beneath all that beauty, something had begun to crack. Angela felt Ethan's fingers tighten around her wrist, and in that small grip, she heard everything the child was too young to say. Do not leave me here with them. Do not let them make me feel small. Do not let their laughter become the truth. She turned back slowly, the clean fork forgotten for a moment on the service plate in her hand. The chandelier above them threw warm light across her face, catching the moisture she had refused to let fall from her eyes. Angela had learned the discipline of not crying in public from a life that offered too many reasons to practice. She had stood in emergency rooms while families questioned whether she belonged beside their children. She had taken buses home after midnight with her feet aching and her uniform smelling like disinfectant. She had smiled through insults because rent did not care about pride and medicine did not care about wounded feelings. But this was different. Ethan was watching. His small face was pale, his lower lip pressed tight, his eyes darting from Madison to Carter to the others, as if trying to understand why grown people dressed in beautiful clothes could sound so ugly. Angela set the service plate down on the sideboard and lowered herself beside his chair, not caring that the movement made Madison's eyebrows rise. Ethan, she said softly, look at me. His eyes found hers. You did nothing wrong. He nodded once, but his breathing still came too fast. Angela placed one hand flat against the table, where he could see it, calm and open. Smell the roses, she whispered. Blow out the candle. It was their little rhythm, simple enough for panic, quiet enough for crowded rooms. Ethan inhaled, shaky at first. Then he exhaled. Angela counted with him under her breath, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, slow as waves against a dock. The guests watched as if care were some strange performance arranged for their amusement. Harold Benson leaned back in his chair, his mouth twisted with impatience. Is this necessary? He asked. The boy was fine before all this attention. Angela did not look at him. He needs a minute. Madison gave a soft laugh. How dramatic. Children really do learn habits from the people around them. That one landed close to Ethan. His fingers curled into Angela's sleeve, and she saw the shame move through him like a shadow. She wanted to stand up then. She wanted to tell them that their money had not taught them grace, that their manners ended wherever empathy began, that a child should never have to defend the woman who kept him steady. But Angela knew anger could frighten Ethan more than cruelty had, so she swallowed the words and chose him instead. You are safe, she whispered. Nobody at this table gets to decide your heart. Vincent heard that. Across the room, beneath the low murmur of candles and silver, the words reached him with the force of something he had forgotten how to believe. Nobody at this table gets to decide your heart. He looked at Angela, truly looked at her, not as an employee in a black dress, not as a name on a payroll file, but as a woman kneeling beside his son with her own dignity being bruised and still using both hands to protect a child's. The room had misread her silence. Vincent had misread it too. Silence, he realized, was not surrender when it was holding someone else together. Carter cleared his throat, uncomfortable now that the joke had lived long enough to show its real face. "Come on, Vincent," he said with a brittle smile. "No harm meant. We are only teasing." Angela finally raised her eyes. She did not look angry. That would have been easier for them. Anger could be dismissed. Her calm could not. "Children remember what adults call harmless," she said. The sentence settled over the table like ash. Madison's smile disappeared for half a second before she forced it back into place. Ethan's breathing steadied, but he did not let go of Angela's sleeve. Vincent's hand rested beside his plate, completely still. He had not stood yet. He had not spoken yet. But every guard along the wall had straightened. Every servant near the doorway had stopped moving. And every guest with enough instinct to survive powerful rooms began to understand that the most dangerous thing at that table was no longer the insult. It was Vincent Callahan's silence. Vincent Callahan had built his life by noticing what others tried to hide. But that night, the detail that held him was not Madison's forced smile or Carter's nervous fingers around his wine glass. It was the edge of a white hospital bracelet tucked inside the pocket of Angela Brooks's dress. She had shifted while calming Ethan, and for one brief second, the small band slipped into view, creased from being folded, the printed letters faded but still visible beneath the candlelight. Vincent's eyes caught the name first. Ethan Callahan. Then the date. 2 weeks earlier. The room around him seemed to narrow until the laughter, the crystal, the expensive voices all became distant. 2 weeks earlier had been the night rain struck the estate so hard it blurred every window and turned the long driveway into a river of silver. Vincent had been trapped in a meeting downtown, his phone lighting up with messages from the house physician, the head of security, the driver, everyone speaking in urgent fragments that made no sense until one sentence cut through all of it. "Ethan is not breathing right." The memory returned cold and precise. A new sleep medication had been approved that afternoon by a private Dr. Madison Whitmore had personally recommended, a doctor with polished credentials and the kind of confidence that made careless people feel safe. Ethan had taken one small dose after dinner. By midnight, his face was flushed, his chest tight, his little body fighting for air while the storm outside knocked power from half the property. The backup systems worked, but the west garage door jammed. The main driveway gate stalled. The ambulance was delayed by fallen branches along Sheridan Road. Vincent remembered shouting into the phone, not because anger could fix anything, but because fear needed somewhere to go. Then, somehow, Ethan had reached the hospital. The staff told Vincent a household employee had carried him out through the old garden entrance, wrapped him in a blanket, and kept him upright in the back seat of a groundskeeper's truck for nearly 5 miles until they met the ambulance near the county road. By the time Vincent arrived, soaked in rain and dread, Ethan was stable. Nobody had given him the employee's name. In the confusion, the story dissolved into medical updates, paperwork, and relief so sharp it almost hurt. Vincent had meant to ask. Then his world closed around his son's recovery, and the question disappeared beneath the machinery of power and protection. Now he saw the answer kneeling beside Ethan in a plain black dress, while people who had done nothing mocked the woman who had done everything. Angela had never mentioned it. She had not asked for money. She had not asked for praise. She had not even corrected the record when the house physician took credit for recognizing the reaction early. Vincent's jaw tightened, not with rage, but with something heavier. Shame. Across the table, Madison watched him watching Angela, and the color in her face changed by half a shade. It was small, almost invisible, but Vincent had survived too long by ignoring small things. His gaze moved from the bracelet to Madison's wrist, where her diamond bracelet rested against flawless skin. She lifted her glass too quickly. Carter began talking again, louder than before, filling the silence with nonsense about charity boards and neighborhood improvement, as if enough words could bury what had risen in the room. Angela helped Ethan take another slow breath. Her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a pale scar along her wrist, the kind left by broken glass or a hard fall. Vincent remembered one more detail from that storm night, something the nurse had said while checking Ethan's chart. Whoever carried him in was bleeding, but she would not sit down until the boy was seen first. The knife in Vincent's hand lowered to the table. Softly, completely. The room felt it. Ethan leaned against Angela, finally calm, unaware that the truth had just stepped out of the shadows. Vincent looked at the woman who had protected his son without asking to be seen, then looked at the guests who had mistaken her humility for permission. For the first time that evening, his silence was no longer waiting. It was choosing where judgment would land. Madison Whitmore should have stopped when she saw Vincent's hand leave the knife, but pride often mistakes warning for weakness. She drew a slow breath, arranged her face into something polished and wounded, then looked toward Angela with the soft cruelty of someone used to being forgiven before she apologized. "I simply think boundaries matter," she said. "There is a reason certain people are hired to serve and certain people are invited to sit." The sentence moved through the dining room and stripped the last warmth from it. Even Carter stopped smiling. Harold Benson looked down at his plate. One of the women at the far end reached for her water and missed the glass by an inch. Angela remained beside Ethan, her hand still open on the table so he could follow her breathing. But something inside her went very still. Not broken. Still. There is a difference. She had spent her life hearing people build fences with polite words, using phrases like boundaries, standards, tradition, and comfort when what they really meant was know your place. She knew that language. It had followed her through hospital corridors, apartment offices, bank counters, and elegant homes where people trusted her with their children, but not with their respect. Ethan felt the change in her before anyone else did. He looked up, his voice small but clear. "Miss Angela sits with me when I am scared." Madison's mouth tightened. "That is very sweet, honey, but grown-up rooms have grown-up rules." Angela's eyes lifted then. She did not speak. She only looked at Madison, and the calm in her face made the older woman shift in her chair. Carter tried to laugh again, but it came out thin. "Vincent, surely you understand. Nobody is attacking the woman. We are just saying there are levels to these things." Levels. The word landed at the head of the table like a match dropped near gasoline. Vincent looked at Carter for a long moment, then at Madison, then at Ethan's hand clutching Angela's sleeve. The boy's breathing had steadied, but his eyes were wet. That was the final measure. Not the insult, not the arrogance. The fact that they had made his child ashamed of loving the person who protected him. Madison, sensing the room slipping away from her, leaned forward and made the mistake that finished the evening. "Women like her always act loyal until they find something worth taking," she said. The silence after that was absolute. No silverware, no glasses, no polite cough. Angela's face changed for the first time, a flicker of pain crossing her eyes before she lowered them to Ethan. He began to breathe too quickly again, pulled back into the memory of rain, flashing lights, and adults who had not moved fast enough. Angela turned fully toward him, shutting out the table as if the mansion, the money, and the cruelty had all vanished. "Ethan, listen to my voice," she whispered. "You are here. You are safe. Feel my hand. Breathe with me." She placed his palm gently against the smooth edge of the table. "In for 4. Out for 6. Vincent stood. The chair did not scrape loudly. It only shifted back a few inches, but the sound cut through the room with more force than shouting ever could. Every head turned. Madison froze with her wineglass halfway to her lips. Carter's face lost its color. Angela did not turn around at first. She stayed focused on Ethan, because even judgment could wait when a child needed air. Vincent walked slowly from the head of the table to his son's chair. The guards along the wall straightened, but he lifted one hand slightly, telling them without words to remain still. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. He stopped beside Angela and looked down at Ethan, who was clutching her hand like it was the only solid thing in the world. Vincent's voice, when it came, was low enough that the room leaned in to hear it. "Angela." She looked up carefully. "Yes, sir." His eyes moved to the faded hospital bracelet tucked in her pocket, then to the scar along her wrist, then back to her face. "Were you the one who carried my son through the rain?" Angela's lips parted, but no answer came. She seemed almost embarrassed to be seen. Before she could protect everyone with silence again, Ethan spoke, his voice trembling but certain. "She saved me, Papa." The words settled over the table, soft as a child's breath and heavy as a verdict. Vincent closed his eyes for half a second, and when he opened them, the man who looked at Madison Whitmore was no longer a host at dinner. He was a father who had finally understood, who had stood closest to his son when it mattered. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The power in the room had already moved toward him like metal drawn to a magnet, quiet, immediate, and undeniable. He stood beside Angela and Ethan for one long second, letting the truth settle where the laughter had been. Then he turned toward the table. "For 2 weeks," he said, "I have been told that my son survived because the right doctor made the right call at the right time." The house physician, seated 3 chairs from Madison, lowered his eyes. Vincent noticed. Everyone noticed. "Tonight," Vincent continued, "I learned that while the storm delayed the ambulance, while my gates failed, while trained adults waited for instructions, Angela Brooks carried my son out through the garden entrance, kept him breathing, and rode with him until help arrived." Angela's hand tightened around Ethan's, but she said nothing. She looked almost ashamed of the attention, as if saving a child were a private matter and being praised for it was an interruption. Vincent looked at her for a moment, and something in his face softened before he turned back to the guests. "She bled that night," he said. "She refused treatment until Ethan was seen first. Then she returned to work 3 days later and did not mention it to me once." The words hit the table harder than any accusation could have. Carter Whitmore opened his mouth, found no useful sound, and closed it again. Madison's smile had disappeared completely now, leaving only the careful stillness of someone calculating how much damage the truth could do. Vincent lifted one hand toward the doorway. "Mrs. Alvarez." The house manager stepped in at once, gray-haired, composed, carrying a slim blue folder against her chest. She had been waiting nearby, as all good house managers did, invisible until needed and sharper than anyone guessed. Vincent did not take the folder from her right away. He looked at Madison instead. "You recommended Dr. Bellamy, did you not?" Madison's throat moved. "He is one of the best pediatric specialists in Illinois." "That is not what I asked." The room shrank around her. "Yes," she said carefully. "I introduced him." Vincent accepted the folder and opened it. The candlelight touched the pages inside, clean white sheets filled with appointment records, pharmacy notes, and printed messages. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just paper. Sometimes paper was enough to make a room collapse. "Dr. Bellamy prescribed the medication that nearly cost my son his life," Vincent said. "He did it after a private consultation arranged through your office. 3 days later, his clinic received a donation from your family foundation." Madison sat perfectly still. Carter whispered her name, but she did not look at him. "That donation was public," she said, "for children's health programs." Vincent turned one page. The medication was not necessary. Ethan's regular pediatrician had rejected it twice. Dr. Bellamy overruled him after one dinner with you. No one moved. Angela looked from Vincent to Madison, understanding arriving slowly, not as anger, but as grief. The cruelty at the table had not been random. It had come from a woman who wanted influence over the Callahan household and saw Angela as the one person standing too close to the truth. Madison's voice thinned. "You are twisting this because your nanny has made you emotional." Vincent closed the folder. The sound was soft. "Final." "No," he said. "I am seeing clearly because my nanny had more loyalty in one stormy night than you have shown in years of smiling at my table." Ethan leaned against Angela's side, and this time she did not tell him to let go. The room was silent enough to hear the candles breathe. Vincent held the blue folder in one hand, but he did not look at it again. The evidence had done its work. Now the room waited for what kind of man he would choose to be with all that truth in his hands. In his younger years, people had feared Vincent Callahan because they believed power meant making others tremble. But fatherhood had changed the weight of power. It had taught him that the strongest thing a man could do was not to frighten a room, but to protect the one person in it who had been given every reason to feel alone. He turned first to Angela. She was still kneeling beside Ethan's chair, one hand wrapped around his, the other resting against the edge of the table. Her face was composed, but Vincent could see the cost of that composure, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the careful breathing of a woman who had learned to survive humiliation without letting it harden her. "Miss Brooks," he said, and the formal respect in his voice made several guests look up. "Please stand." Angela hesitated. Ethan did not let go until Vincent bent slightly and spoke to his son. "It is all right, buddy. I am not sending her away." Ethan studied his father's face, searching for the truth, then slowly released her sleeve. Angela rose with the quiet grace of someone who had been knocked down by life many times and still refused to move like she was defeated. Vincent stepped to the chair on his right, the seat Madison had taken when dinner began, and rested his hand on the back of it. Madison stared at him. "Vincent, you cannot be serious." He did not answer her. He looked at Mrs. Alvarez. "Please escort Miss Whitmore to the sitting room until her driver arrives." Madison's face flushed. "You are embarrassing me in front of everyone." Vincent's eyes returned to her, cold and steady. "No, you did that yourself." The sentence struck cleanly. No cruelty, no performance, just consequence. Mrs. Alvarez moved to Madison's side with calm professionalism. Two staff members opened the dining room doors. Madison looked around the table for support, but the same people who had laughed with her now found their plates fascinating. Carter stood halfway, then sat back down when Vincent's gaze touched him. "The Whitmore Foundation will receive notice tomorrow morning," Vincent said. "Every agreement with my family is suspended pending review. Dr. Bellamy's records will be sent to the hospital board. Any guest who laughed tonight may decide whether they leave now with Madison or remain long enough to apologize to the woman they insulted." Chairs shifted, faces lowered. The room that had been so quick to enjoy Angela's discomfort now struggled beneath its own. Harold Benson was the first to stand. His voice was dry. "Miss Brooks, I was unkind." Angela looked at him without rescuing him from the awkwardness. "Yes, sir. You were." A quiet shock passed through the table. Not because she had raised her voice. She had not. But because she had finally allowed the truth to stand upright. One by one, the apologies came, thin at first, then heavier as shame found language. Angela accepted none of them with a smile. She simply listened, her hand returning to Ethan's shoulder when he leaned toward her. When Madison reached the doorway, she turned back, eyes bright with anger and humiliation. "You are choosing the help over your own people." Vincent pulled out the chair at his right. "I am choosing the person who protected my son." Then he looked at Angela. "Sit here." Angela froze. Every servant near the walls went still. Ethan smiled for the first time that evening, small but real. Angela walked to the chair as if crossing a bridge built in front of the whole world. When she sat, Vincent remained standing behind her for one breath, not as a boss above an employee, but as a man publicly placing respect where contempt had tried to sit. The room had never felt quieter. The candles still burned. The silver still shined. But the table had changed. Everyone in it now understood that dignity had not entered when Angela sat down. It had been there all along, waiting for someone powerful enough and humble enough to recognize it. By the time Madison Whitmore's footsteps faded beyond the dining room doors, no one at the table seemed hungry anymore. The plates were still full, the wine still dark in its crystal glasses, the white roses still floating in their shallow bowls as if beauty had not just witnessed shame. Angela sat at Vincent's right hand with Ethan pressed close beside her, his small fingers curled around the edge of her sleeve. She did not look like a woman who had won anything. She looked like a woman trying to understand what it felt like to be defended in the same room where she had been wounded. That was the part Vincent could not stop seeing. Not the apologies, not the lowered eyes, not the quiet panic of powerful people realizing that cruelty had cost them access to a bigger power. He saw only Angela, sitting straight-backed in a chair that had not been offered to her until justice forced the room to make space. Mrs. Alvarez returned from the hallway and gave Vincent a small nod. Madison was gone. The doctor's file was secured. The household had already begun moving with the silent efficiency of people who understood that a night like this would be remembered for years. Vincent looked toward the remaining guests. "Dinner is over," he said. No one argued. Chairs moved softly. Napkins were placed beside unfinished plates. Men who had entered the mansion with confidence now walked out carefully, as if the floor itself had learned their names. Harold Benson paused near Angela before leaving. For a moment, he looked like a man searching for a sentence big enough to repair what a smaller sentence had broken. He did not find one. Angela spared him from nothing. She simply held his gaze until he lowered his eyes and left. When the room was finally empty, the silence changed. It was no longer dangerous. It was tired. Ethan leaned against Angela, his breathing even now, his little body heavy with the exhaustion that follows fear. "Can Miss Angela stay until I fall asleep?" he asked. Vincent looked at Angela, not over her, not through her, but at her. "That is her choice," he said. Angela's eyes softened. "Of course I will." She stood, and this time Vincent stepped back to let her move first. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but Mrs. Alvarez saw it from the doorway and smiled to herself. Upstairs, in Ethan's room, Angela sat beside his bed while the storm clouds gathered again beyond the window. She hummed the old hymn from her grandmother's kitchen, low and steady, until Ethan's eyes closed. Vincent stood in the hallway, listening. For years, he had filled that house with guards, locks, cameras, gates, and men trained to keep danger away. Yet the person who had made his son feel safest carried no title that impressed the world. She carried patience. She carried attention. She carried love without demanding to own what it saved. When Angela stepped into the hallway, Vincent was waiting with the folded hospital bracelet in his palm. "You kept this," he said. She looked at it, then at him. "I kept it to remind myself he made it through." Vincent's throat tightened. "And you never told me." Angela's voice stayed gentle. "You were his father. You were scared. You did not need another story that night." The answer humbled him more than any accusation could have. Vincent looked down, then back at the woman who had stood in his house for months without asking for recognition. "From now on," he said, "no one here gets to make you feel invisible." Angela did not smile right away. She had lived too long to trust sudden kindness without watching what it became. But after a moment, she nodded. Downstairs, the dining room staff cleared away the cold food and gathered the untouched silver. By morning, the city would whisper about the canceled agreements, the disgraced doctor, and the guests who left the Callahan estate pale and silent. But inside the house, the story became simpler. A child slept peacefully. A father learned humility. And a woman who had been mocked beneath a chandelier walked out of that night with her dignity not restored, but finally recognized. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.